All right, so let's talk all about capacity. So remember, capacity is how much liquid something can hold. So there are a couple of tools that we can use. We can use graduated cylinders, measuring cups, and jugs. And like we talked about in the vocabulary, these are things you should have seen in science. Remember, there are two different types. So there are customary units, which is what we use in the United States, and there are metric units, which is what everybody else in the whole world uses. So for customary units, there are fluid ounces, and fluid ounces are things that are small. Then we have cups, and it is just like you would think of like a normal cup. Then we have a pint. A good way to remember this is 2 cups stacked on top of each other. A quart would be like 4 cups stacked on top of each other. And then a gallon is actually 8 cups stacked on top of each other. And I always think about like a gallon of milk or a gallon of paint or different things like that. So we use fluid ounces to measure the smaller things. We use gallons to measure the bigger things. And then depending on the size of how much liquid is in the container, we will either use a cup, a pint, or a quart. The other ones we have are metric units. So metric units, for 3rd grade, there's only 2. So we have milliliters. And milliliters are what you use for smaller things. And there are liters, and liters are what you use for bigger things. Now on your 3rd grade math reference chart, it looks like this. So it again will tell you customary and metric, and then it tells you that 1 gallon is equal to 4 quarts, 1 quart is equal to 2 pints, 1 pint is equal to 2 cups, 1 cup is equal to 8 fluid ounces. For metric, 1 liter is equal to 1,000 milliliters. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a bunch of different objects, and I want you to tell me if you would use a fluid ounce, a cup, a pint, a quart, or a gallon to actually measure the capacity of that object. And then we're going to do the same exact thing with the same exact objects, and we're going to talk about metric units. So we use a milliliter or a liter. So let's get started. So these are all about customary. So which unit of measure would we use to fill up this container? So if we had a swimming pool, would we want to use a little bitty cup like this to fill it all the way up, or would we want to use a cup, a pint, a quart, or a gallon? Well, I hope you said gallon. Now, we could use a quart, a pint, a cup, or a fluid ounce. Those are all completely fine. It would just take us a long time. So for bigger objects, I'm going to use a bigger unit of measurement to fill it up. So for a pool, I'm going to measure it in gallons. I'm going to see how many gallons it takes to fill it up. Okay, what about a pond? So I'm playing a game and they have this pond, and it makes me wonder, how much water is in that pond? So would I use fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallons? Yeah, just like the pool, I'm going to use gallons because it's a bigger body of water, and so I want to use my biggest unit of measurement. Okay, what about this jug? Sometimes you've seen these jugs for water. So if it's a bigger jug, would I want to use fluid ounces? Would I want to use a little bitty cup? Or would I want to use something that's bigger to fill it up? That's right, I would use a gallon because again, this is a bigger object, and so I'm going to use my biggest unit of measure. Okay, what about my dog's bowl? He gets thirsty, so what am I going to use? Am I going to use fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallons? Oh, that's true. I heard somebody say, well, it depends on the size of the bowl. And you know what? You're right. So it's just kind of a medium-sized bowl. So what do you think I would use? Yeah, I'm going to say a quart. Now remember, I can use a quart, but I also could use a pint or a cup or even fluid ounces. So I can use, this would be the one that I would probably pick from my dog's bowl, but I could use these other ones. It would just take a lot longer. So I want to be as efficient as I can, and so I'm going to use quarts to help me with that. Okay, now it's time for me to cook. I'm going to boil some spaghetti. I love spaghetti. So if I wanted to put some water on to start boiling, would I use fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallons? What do you think? Yeah, I would use quarts. And a lot of times, pots are actually labeled by how many quarts they can hold. So a 6 quart, 8 quart, 4 quart, just depending on the size of the pot. All right, ice cream. Who doesn't love ice cream? Well, actually, I know some people who don't. But I'm going to eat this ice cream. And if you're looking really close, it actually tells us the answer. But for the ice cream, am I going to measure it in fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallon? That's right. I'm going to use a pint. So whenever you get like the small cups about the cups that are about this big, those are a pint of ice cream. What about this? I have my water bottle and I need to refill it because I drink so much water already. What would I use? Would I use fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallons? Again, you're right. It depends on what size the bottle is. So depending on what size it is will depend on which unit of measure we're going to use. But it's just a normal size water bottle. So I'm going to use a pint. Now sometimes whenever you actually see a water bottle, if you look at the label, it's not going to say pint or cup. It'll actually say fluid ounces because that's how they want to be super precise. They want it to have a certain amount in it. But if I'm just filling it up for me and not for the company, I'm probably going to use a pint because it holds more water or more liquid. Okay, gotta have my coffee. I love my coffee in the morning. So if I have a coffee, am I going to use fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallons? Now granted, I love coffee, but I don't think I could drink a whole gallon of coffee. That's a lot of coffee. So what do you think I would use? Yeah, a cup. I'm going to drink a cup of coffee. Okay, and most coffee cups are about an actual cup. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger depending on the size. Like this one that I have, this is way bigger than a cup. This is probably more like a pint. But if I'm just using an actual coffee cup, maybe. If I just have an actual coffee cup, this is actually about 1 cup. Alright, what if I wanted to fill up my beaker and I wanted to see how much it could hold? You're right, it depends on what size it is. So this one's one of the smaller ones. Would I use fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, or gallons? That's right, I'm going to use a cup. Alright, what about a spoon? Am I going to be able to use a gallon for a spoon? No, that's silly. So I'm going to use fluid ounces because a spoon can't hold a lot of water or liquid. What about your glue bottle? On your glue bottle, it'll actually tell you the answer, but I don't want you to get it up right now. So on your glue bottle, it is fluid ounces. Okay, well, let's do the same thing, but let's use the metric system. So for metric, we only have 2 choices, either milliliters or liters. Milliliters are for the smaller ones, liters are for the bigger ones. So for our pool, what would we use? That's right, we would use liters. What about for the pond? That's right, we would use liters again. Alright, what about for our big jug of water? Would we use milliliters or liters? You guys are so smart. You would use liters, that's right. Alright, what about my dog's bowl? Now again, it depends on the size of the bowl. But I think for the most part, I'm going to use liters. And for my pot to cook everything in, that's right, I'm going to use liters. Alright, what about my pint of ice cream? So pint's not an option. Remember, it's either milliliters or liters. This time I'm going to actually use milliliters. It would have to be about twice this size for me to use a liter, but since it's not, I'm going to actually use a milliliter. Okay, what about my bottle of water? And again, if you actually look at the label, sometimes it'll tell you how many milliliters are in it. For this one, I'm going to use milliliters. What about my coffee cup? Am I going to use milliliters or liters? Now again, I love coffee, but I don't know if I could drink a whole liter of coffee. That's quite a bit. So I'm going to use milliliters. For my beaker, that's actually what these numbers represent. These are actually milliliters, and it can be very precise, and I can know exactly how much is actually inside of it. So right now there's close to 50 milliliters of water in this image. Alright, what about my spoon? Would I use milliliters or liters? That's right, I'm going to use milliliters. And for my glue, you got it, I'm using milliliters again. So it's really important to know which, if we're using customary or if we're using metric, and which unit we are going to use to measure the object. So just like we did yesterday, I want to look at examples of capacity and not examples of capacity. And you're actually going to do an activity like this on your exit ticket today, so make sure you're paying attention. So what I want to know is I have these 8 different scenarios. 4 of them are for capacity and 4 of them are not capacity. So remember, capacity is dealing with how much liquid a object can hold. If that's what we're talking about, it's going to go over here on examples of capacity. If it's not, it's going to come over here to not an example of capacity. So our first one says measuring how tall a building is. If I want to know how tall a building is that an example of capacity or not an example of capacity? That's right, it's not an example of capacity. Okay, sorry about that. My computer started acting funny. All right, so we said that measuring how tall a building is not an example of capacity. So let's look at our next one. So measuring how much juice is in a cup, is that a capacity or not capacity? That's right, it's capacity because we're seeing how much juice can be inside of that cup. Okay, what about how much water a bottle can hold? That's right, it's an example of capacity because we're seeing how much liquid can go inside of that bottle. What if we want to measure how heavy a book is? If we want to know how heavy a book is that an example of capacity or not capacity? That's right, it's not capacity. That's actually weight, and that's from yesterday. Okay, what if I want to know how heavy a car is? If I want to know how heavy a car is that capacity or is that not capacity? That's right, it's not capacity, that's weight again. All right, what if I want to know how much ketchup is in a container? Is that capacity or not capacity? That's right, it actually is capacity because I'm seeing how much I can put inside of it. How much water is in a pool? If I'm measuring how much water is in a pool, is that capacity or not capacity? That's right, it's an example of capacity. And our final one, measuring how high you can jump. If I want to know how high I can jump, is that capacity or not capacity? That's right, it's not capacity.